definitely on. Good evening, I'm Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, and I want to thank you for participating in this panel. This is really about leadership and collaboration, and I'm incredibly honored and delighted to be one of the representatives of American states who are attending COP26 and who are leading the way toward a cleaner, greener future, and whose presence here as Americans back on the world stage on this all-important subject underscores the critical nature of subnational commitment to meaningful, significant, and equitable climate action. In fact, leadership at every level matters. States like mine, New Mexico, and like those represented by my fellow panelists, are accustomed to being laboratories for innovative policies and practices. And when the federal government can't or won't lead, we will, and frankly, we do. And when the federal government shares our commitment to progress, as is the case right now in the Biden administration, our leadership at the state level can and serves as an example. For instance, the Biden administration's announcement this morning that the United States will aggressively regulate methane emissions in many ways mirrors New Mexico's commitment to the very same, which has been one of the key priorities of my state administration. I am incredibly thrilled because it seems, I'm going to look right at Gina McCarthy, that the Biden administration is following to some degree New Mexico's example of strict compliance and comprehensive monitoring. Policy in my home state can be a roadmap for everyone's state, and ultimately, as we are reminded here on the global stage, the world. So we must continue to enact these kinds of compounding policies at every level, local, state, federal, to have the kind of impact in the kind of time frame that we need to prevent unalterable catastrophe. Although the three states represented on stage today, New Mexico, California, Louisiana, are vastly different in many ways, although I am looking to trade some green chili for gumbo, Governor Edwards. We share the same goals of enacting policies that incentivize green technologies, training workers for new jobs and new fields, intentionally building equity into jobs and business opportunities in new industries, and supporting communities in the transition away from fossil fuels. I believe this conversation today can take us in a positive and collaborative, action-oriented direction. I have a few questions prepared, and I'm going to discuss the opportunities for collaboration between like-minded states, how states can work with the federal government to address and mitigate the effects of climate change on underserved communities, such as the almost 24 tribal nations and pueblos of my home state. How equity and environmental justice can be foregrounded in the policy work that we do, and how the states and federal government can help one another to ensure the very important and sometimes fragile progress we make is not undone by potential future administrations. In short, how we can maintain the American leadership that is so necessary to meet the goals we have set globally for ourselves. Now, I'm going to have each of the panelists, because they're going to open up with 5-minute remarks, introduce themselves, but I get to introduce the first panelist who's going to make opening remarks, the Lieutenant Governor from Hawaii, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Koulinakis, who we're delighted to have here. What did I say? Hawaii. I said Hawaii. Well, Hawaii and California are two of my favorite states. You just have to keep rolling with the punches. So you can be the Lieutenant Governor, but don't tell the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii that I've made you the Lieutenant Governor of now the entire western area of the United States, including all of the Pacific Islands. You're welcome. In any event, I'm delighted. This is our first time getting to say hello to each other. It is not the first time that I've seen incredible leadership out of California in a number of incredible leading climate change policies. And I have no doubt that in this panel conversation today, you are going to show everyone around the globe just how critical the leadership in California is. Welcome. I'll trade you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Eleni Kounalakis, Lieutenant Governor of California, and what an incredible privilege to be here with you, Governor, and of course with you, Gina McCarthy, for this conversation. And what an incredible privilege it is to be in Glasgow with all of the challenges around the world of the COVID-19 crisis. Just the fact that the organizers were able to assemble us and bring us together is an incredibly important accomplishment. And I also just want to acknowledge how incredibly powerful a message it has been to see President of the United States, Joe Biden, here for the opening yesterday, along with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Secretary for Climate, or Special Envoy for Climate, former Secretary of State John Kerry. The message from the United States to the world is absolutely clear, which is that we're back, we're all in, and this is an enormous relief to those of us in California, and we are just very, very pleased to see the United States step back into its role in leading on addressing climate change. So the view from California is always optimistic. It's in our nature. And it is always rooted in the sense that no challenge, no problem is too big for us to tackle with intention and with a lot of hard work. And with, as we are fortunate to have in California, a very powerful economy. So what I wanted to do, just to set the stage a little bit, to talk about California's role in the world today and leading on innovation around addressing climate change, is talk a little bit about the past. You know, very often our governor, Gavin Newsom, will say that California is like a nation state. We're 40 million people. If we were a country, we would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And I'm a former U.S. ambassador. There is a difference between being a sovereign nation and being a subnational government. But in one way, California has had almost sovereign power since the Clean Air Act in the 1970s, and that has been around our emission standards. It has been tested many times over the years. Most recently, the Trump administration filed lawsuits against our state to take away our power to set our own emission standards. That lawsuit went through the courts and California prevailed, preserving our control over our emission standards. And so with that authority, we have used it. And many of you remember the catalytic converter that came as a direct result of California regulating NOx gases back in the 70s. You may also remember in the early 2000s when the very first legislation in the country to set greenhouse gas emission standards happened in California. 12 years later, those CAFE standards under President Obama became the standards for the entire country. So what I would suggest, again, just to be a little provocative here, is that California has been the tail that has wagged the dog on environmental protection, and that we are continuing to play that role. And very recently, in the last year, a very important new standard was set for our state by Governor Gavin Newsom, and that is that by 2035, all new cars in the state of California must be zero-emission vehicles to be sold in our state. We are the largest consumer market in the United States, and this standard is most certainly already shaping the future of our light-duty vehicles and commercial vehicle travel. So what I would call upon, as we all stand here together, so privileged to be in Glasgow, and for everybody who's watching this live stream, is that we take Governor Newsom's new standard that by 2035, only zero-emission vehicles will be sold in the state of California, and that we call upon the other states in the United States to do the same, and for the federal government to eventually follow suit. So with that, I'll hand the microphone back again to you, Governor, and thank you all. I look forward to this robust conversation.
So instead of getting up and down, why don't I introduce, and I'll get this right, the incredible governor from Louisiana, John Bel Edwards. Governor.
Thank you, Governor Luan Grisham, and it is great to be here with you and with Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis. Nice to meet you, and to be here with Gina McCarthy, who's been a leader in this space for about 3 decades, linking the environment to public health, being the administrator for the EPA under President Obama, now back as the White House domestic climate advisor. National climate, that was pretty close. That was pretty close. So I want to thank all of you and tell you that I'm excited to be here in Glasgow and talking about these issues. You know, all of our states are different and we've all been affected by climate change, but I would make the case that no state has been more adversely affected by climate change than the state of Louisiana. We've had, in 14 months, 5 major hurricanes make landfall in our state. 2 of them, one last year and another one in August this year, the 2 strongest hurricanes ever recorded making landfall in Louisiana. During that same time period, we've had flash floods. We had a freak winter storm, the likes of which nobody can remember. And the day before I came up here, I was back in southwest Louisiana, which had been ravaged by one of the hurricanes that I just mentioned, actually by 2 of them, because it was a tornado. And while we can't for certain point to any one storm and say it wouldn't have happened but for climate change, we know that the frequency and the severity of these severe weather events is increasing. And we know that it's because of climate change. In addition to that, in the last 50 years, we've lost 2,000 square miles of coast in Louisiana. If we don't do anything, we're going to lose another 1,800 square miles of coast. And I can bring this full circle because every acre of coastal marsh will sequester as much carbon as 80 acres of forest. So losing that land, it exacerbates the climate change problem, but it also eliminates the buffer that we have between the Gulf of Mexico and our populated areas. So we have an absolute need, stronger than anywhere else in the country, to engage in climate change mitigation, and that's why I'm here. But we also have tremendous opportunities in Louisiana to do that. We are the only state in the nation where more than half of our CO2 emissions don't come from power generation. They come from industrial manufacturing, chemical manufacturing and refiners. But what that means is we have an opportunity to lead in this space and to actually work with other states to make sure that we can move forward together as we reduce our carbon footprint. We have a tremendous opportunity when it comes to methane, which is 80 times more potent than CO2 when it comes to what's actually warming the earth, because we have more pipelines in Louisiana. Our pipeline density is stronger, greater, I should say, than anywhere else in the country. There's a reason they price natural gas in Erath, Louisiana. It's because we produce natural gas and we have the pipelines that move it. But all of that aging infrastructure, that legacy infrastructure, is leaky infrastructure. And I'm embarrassed to tell you we have 4,600 orphan wells in Louisiana. These are wells that haven't been properly plugged. And if we want to do something in the near term that would have a tremendous impact to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it would be around methane in addition to CO2. And I too want to thank the administration, Gina McCarthy, for coming out with regulations, and by the way, working with industry to make that happen. I do that in Louisiana too. Quite frankly, I wouldn't be successful in having announced that we are going to reduce our carbon emissions, for example, about 40 to 50% by 2030 and be at net zero by 2050 if I hadn't brought together academicians, the non-governmental organizations, our environmental groups, state, local agencies, but also, quite frankly, industry in Louisiana. And we wouldn't be successful without that, but we are getting buy-in, and I will tell you, one of the things that excites me most is we're already making tangible progress. It was announced last week that one of our 3 remaining coal-powered electric generation facilities is going to be retired 5 years early by the end of this year, so we will reduce that. Just 3 weeks ago, we announced a $4.5 billion carbon capture and sequestration project in Louisiana. Final investment decision has already been made. This is going to be a hydrogen project with carbon capture and sequestration. In fact, the largest carbon capture and sequestration program anywhere in the world that has reached final investment decision. And so those are some of the things we're doing. And by the way, we can't just do some of them. We're going to have to do all of the above. So it's going to be hydrogen, it's going to be carbon capture and sequestration, it's going to be renewables, wind. I'm very optimistic that sometime in the next 14 or 15 months, we're going to have the first ever lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico for wind energy. And we want to play in that space. If you can fabricate an offshore oil platform, you can fabricate an offshore wind platform. And if you have the vessels to service the offshore oil platforms, you can service the wind platforms too. And so we can do a lot. We're going to have to do some workforce development, but we're prepared to do it. And by the way, the coal-fired plant that we're taking offline 5 years early is going to be replaced by renewables. And that electricity will be sold not just in Louisiana, but in Arkansas and in Texas. So we have an awful lot going on in Louisiana because we have to. And I'm excited because, and this gets to Michelle's issue, I don't believe that the next governor, and by the way, I'm not in a hurry to leave office, I've got 2 years left, I don't believe the next governor is going to be able to walk this back, even if they're not thinking like I am. And by the way, my neighbors don't really talk too much, my neighboring governors, they don't talk too much about climate change. They haven't committed to the Paris Accord agreements and so forth. But we all understand economic development. We all understand investment and job creation. And this is real. This is happening as we speak, and it's just going to accelerate. And so I think that's how we can have a transformative impact so that when our days are done and somebody else follows us into office, it's going to be very, very clear the direction that they need to continue to go. So I'm excited about being here. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be with my colleagues. I think, look forward to the questions. You know, I always hedge a little bit because those questions can sometimes be really, really hard. But I think I look forward to the questions, and I thank all of you. I'm going to introduce Gina McCarthy. I've already told you an awful lot about her, but really for 30 years, she has been linking public health to the environment. And she served as the administrator of the EPA under President Obama. She's now the senior advisor to President Biden, who is obviously leading in this space, unlike his predecessor. And therefore, this is a very high priority for him, and that's why he chose Gina McCarthy. So Gina, you take it.
Can you get by me? It's a tight space. I was just making sure you could get by this.
Oh, I'm good, thanks. Hi, everybody. Well, the first thing that I want to do is thank the governors for their courage to come here, because I firmly believe that the federal government is all we need, and I just wanted to make that clear up front. Maybe I better clarify that a little bit. You know, I think everybody probably knows that I cut my teeth at the local level and the state level, and I know how change happens, and it ain't at the federal government. It is pave the way to change happens at the local level and it happens at the state level. And you just happen to be looking at 3 governors who have the courage to actually set the pace for change in the United States of America. And every time that happens, it gives the federal government an opportunity to actually make that happen in a broader and more consistent way. You know, you have Governor Lujan Grisham, who has been busting her butt making sure that oil and gas is properly regulated. Well, guess what? We just rewarded you by doing that nationally. How's that sound? And we did it because it's the right thing to do, because you tested it, the technologies are available, it's cost effective. Why, if you're a natural gas well operator, wouldn't you want to actually capture the natural gas that you're leaking and sell it? Isn't that the United States of America? I think that's okay if we keep working together to make sure that we're paying attention and supporting the innovation at other levels of government and scaling it up so it can make the kind of difference that we need to have an impact on something as significant as climate change. And so we just made it a big announcement on methane. And we're going to go after it. And guess what? We're accompanied by more than 100 other countries to go after it. That's what you call scaling up. Because we have to do it. And guess what? So does everybody else. Because there isn't a country in the world now that is denying the fact that climate change is an existential challenge. And if you're not in, then we could all be out. And so we have to work together. And it was remarkable to be able to already have a great outline of a methane action plan that we have already developed to achieve this in the United States of America. We can do this because of the work that has been done by everyone else. Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, I think EPA has done much more than California on car standards, and Jared Blumenfeld will tell you that's the case, won't you, Jared? Absolutely. No, he won't. Because we know that California has been cutting edge on these technologies, and now we are in a position of working with the automakers and with the UAW to prove that a future of electric vehicles are better for our economy as well as climate change. That's what we're proving because of the work that we've been doing together for decades. And I'm excited about it. I think it's going to make big changes. We are being able to do this because we have the biggest automakers, the big 3, standing up and saying, beating one another up to try to see who can get to 100% EVs more quickly. And that's going to mean clean air, particularly for the communities that have been left behind. And our Build Back Better plan doesn't just reward by supporting the manufacturing of electric vehicles in the United States of America. We're making sure that consumers get credit to purchase the vehicles so there's nobody left behind wanting to have access to these new types of vehicles. That's what this partnership brings to the table. And Governor Bell Edwards, I don't know whether you've shown any of the videos you've had of the work you're doing on your shoreline to recapture your marshlands and your wetlands. It shows you miracles in action. It shows you that while nature is now beating us up because of climate, that we have the ability to fight back and to use natural solutions to actually protect ourselves and our communities. Your ability to think outside the box and to pursue so many variety of issues is exactly why we have to work together. It's exactly why we're going to win where climate change is concerned. It's exactly why the United States is going to turn this climate challenge into an opportunity for tremendous amounts of jobs in the clean energy economy, and why we are going to win the 21st century. And it's why we're sitting here with other countries saying, what can we do to get to that 21st century economy together? We are not coming here as leaders after 4 years of climate denial, but we are coming here as full-throated partners which is what you actually need always. We're coming in here with resources to spend and to share with countries that don't have resources on their own. We're coming here to talk about adaptation and resilience rather than just mitigation, because we can't deny the impacts of climate change. We are coming here because we don't just have a response at EPA or the Department of the Interior to the challenges we're facing, but we have a full-throated cabinet that's working on these issues every single day and isn't going to think about things like financial risk anymore without thinking about your pocketbooks and my pocketbooks and how climate change is robbing us of our benefits and how we can make sure that there's transparency in that system and how we all work together. I mean, we are now at a stage where we cannot afford to have lots of luxury of chit-chats. We are now at a time where we have to act. And we have the ability to act. We have the technologies at our fingertips, and we have the innovation that we can spark. We have to move forward with the Build Back Better plan, but we also simply have to work together, recognize the challenges we're facing, and why working together is so much better than working separately, than trying to claim success, rather than working together with the developing world to show them that we recognized our outside responsibility and we're going to bring resources to the table so that each and every country can raise its standard of living, not just bow to the United States for what we have done. That's not how it works, and frankly, that is not how President Biden works. He's in it for everyone. He's a people person, and he's going to make sure that we address climate change in that same way by working together, by recognizing the gift that we have been given in the United States to be able to develop new technologies, to work with other countries, to provide resources to them, to adapt and become more resilient, and to recognize that we had best do the same here. Because we can't reverse the challenge of climate change. We have to adapt, and we have to become more resilient. And that's why I'm incredibly excited that we don't just have this all-of-government approach with our National Climate Task Force, but we also have a new intergovernmental affairs group that is going to work with folks who work with you every day in every one of the agencies. We're going to bring them together so that when there are opportunities, we can deliver them together, because that's how we're going to get out of the climate challenge that we're facing and turn that into the biggest economic opportunity and hopeful response that we can. We just need to tell people that we're all working together, everyone is on one another's side, and we can beat this thing back like we've beaten every other challenge that has faced us. So it's a fun time. It's a time to focus on health. It's a time to focus on people. It's a time to focus on environmental justice and making sure the communities that have been left behind don't get left behind. And it's time to focus on our workers again. Give them a good union job, and we'll keep working just fine. Thanks so much.
Well, now each of our speakers has already leaned in to the questions that I'm going to ask them. So we're going to ask for elaboration, but I think already folks who are watching this and the folks who are participating right here in this room are clear that the commitments by all of the innovators and the states and elected leaders and the federal government has never been more robust and more effective, frankly, than it is today. And I really appreciate, Jeannie, you talking about hope. because I think that drives the right kind of lasting responses, and I really appreciate that. Now I'm going to go to the Lieutenant Governor, and you did an incredible job talking about the things that California's done since the 70s and has identified its leadership role, including in clean fuel standards, clean cars, and really leaning in, particularly to the consumer-based transportation sector, which has to be addressed. I'd love it if you would elaborate a little more on that and any additional initiatives that you see ripe for this kind of leadership and collaboration among other state partners.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just start by recognizing that California and Louisiana do have this in common, that we are feeling the impacts of climate change, and we are feeling them in a very dramatic way. Last year, 4 of the 5 largest wildfires in California history happened. 4% of the state of California burned last year. Now, I could go into it in terms of the elements of those fires and the climate and the drought and the dry forests and dry lightning strikes and winds of power that we have never seen before. But there is a high level of recognition in our state among our people that we are confronting the impacts of climate change, and now is the time for everyone to do their part. So if you look at the number of electric vehicles on the road in the United States, half of them are in California. If you look at the energy grid for California, about 60% of California's electricity now comes from non-carbon based sources. The national average is about 40%. So we have already, through programs, had a very large level of adaptation. You look across our state, we have incredible investments in solar, incredible investments in wind. We are going right now forward with a real concerted effort to develop offshore wind off the state of California. It's a little harder for California than some other areas, including right here off of Scotland, because we have a very deep continental shelf. So we're going to have to look at floating wind turbines as opposed to those that anchor down to the ground. But we're really serious about it, and we do regular engagement with countries around the world that have expertise to help us develop this new wind energy future for our state. But it really goes back to the people and the willingness of the people to be able to accept the kinds of changes that are going to be necessary. And what I think is probably the most important thing for people to know about California's intention right now is that it is all being approached through the lens of equity. We've had programs in our state for a very long time to help people to get subsidies to purchase clean cars, electric cars, to be able to put solar panels on their roof. But the fact is, you need to have the disposable income to be able to do it. So the programs that we're running now are very largely focused on getting to those underserved communities and have those communities be part of the solution as well. And there is a lot of energy around this that's happening, that's very inspiring. And I think that's going to be a very significant part of how we get to the next level. But really, you know, what we have seen the last few years in terms of coping with the impacts of climate change are driving a whole new generation in our state, not just to be willing to try new things or live in a different way, whether again it's energy or plastics, but to be motivated to be part of the solution in other ways. So we have public universities, the University of California, our research universities, our national laboratories, and everywhere I go, I meet young people who are committing themselves to being part of the generation of innovation to be able to do what we really need to do now, which is scale. We have so many solutions out there, so much innovation in battery technology and all these things. But what we have in California as the 5th largest economy in the world, if we were a country, at a massive budget surplus this year of $75 billion, of which $15 billion is going to climate resiliency, is we have young people who are ready to be that next generation of innovators, to be able to bring the innovations to a scale that our friends and colleagues and like-minded governments and activists and people around the world are going to be able to use to make change in their countries and their communities as well.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you. I think making sure that we can incentivize and excite a growing group of young people in new renewable energy technologies and jobs of the future that not only create the kind of opportunity that you've described, but also help us meet these climate action efforts in very meaningful ways. Governor, you talked about the Louisiana in the context of natural gas and abandoned wells and the kind of fossil fuel industries that require, frankly, that you have to have everyone engaged and involved so that these action-oriented items have staying power. As you do that, will you talk to us about ways in which we can have investments to that end that are equitable, particularly in, overburdened communities. And as you know about New Mexico, we're a majority state. We're home to 23 sovereign nations, and it's an issue about making sure that climate justice in this transformation is also achieved by our actions.
Well, thank you very much. And by the way, I was very proud of our $1 billion surplus until you mentioned your $75 billion. I'm going to continue to be proud because I inherited a $2 billion deficit when I went into office, so I'm going to be proud of that. But Michelle, your question is spot on. It is very difficult, but one of the things that I am very mindful of, and this has happened far too often in my 6 years, with the natural disasters, and it happens as a result of storm surge, but also rain. Flood events flood low-lying communities. Do you know who typically lives in low-lying communities? Because the land there is cheaper, precisely because it's more prone to flooding. And so when we take decisive action and mitigate against the risk of flooding to begin with, and when you have repetitive flood loss homes, you offer those homeowners an opportunity, rather than to continue to stay in place. We will pay for you to move somewhere else, and we'll turn that house or that neighborhood into green space. And we're doing that in many places in Louisiana, but you always do it working with these people, because this may be where they've been for generations. And we have one community at the very southern reach of Terrebonne Parish, Ile de Jean Charles. It's a Native American community. A few decades ago, 22,000 acres. There are 320 acres left. The rest of it is Gulf of Mexico, so it's obviously untenable. The very first ever HUD grant to resettle an entire indigenous community in the state of Louisiana. We're doing that. We got that grant under President Obama. But we worked with that community. Where would you like to move to? What would you like your community to look like? In addition to the homes we're going to build for you, what amenities would you like in this community? And that is going to happen. In fact, it's happening right now, and that's going to be complete. But some of these things you have to do where you have to do them. So if I'm going to capture carbon, I have to capture carbon where carbon is being emitted, right? So we're going to do those things. If I'm going to sequester carbon, I have to sequester carbon where there's geologic formations that will accept and permanently sequester those. And so you do the surveys, you know where they are, and you can, at least for a while, we just, by the way, approved our first 2 leases in Louisiana, and in a couple of months, we will be the 3rd state with the autonomy to regulate these wells ourselves, these Class 6 wells. So we can make decisions on where we're going to do these things to a very large degree. And one of the things you have to do, and I think Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis mentioned this a while ago, you have to be intentional. So I have a climate initiatives task force, but a big emphasis on that is equity, and it's stated, and it's something that we are very intentional about. I didn't mention this to you all a while ago. I told you if we don't do anything, we'll lose another 1,500 square miles of land, but we are doing something. We have a $50 billion master plan for coastal restoration and protection that we're well into. We're investing $1 billion a year to support 10,000 jobs. And by the time we are finished with the projects that are already done, those in design and those under construction, for the first time in decades, don't know how long it's going to last, but for the first time in decades, we will be building more land in Louisiana than we're losing. And that helps everybody. But we're building it where it's needed the most to create that buffer zone between the Gulf of Mexico and our populated areas, and especially it's beneficial to those low-income folks who are most at risk in any disaster. They're the very first displaced, or they're the very first to suffer, and then they're the last ones to recover. And so to the extent that we can prevent it from happening or mitigate against it, then they benefit more than anybody else.
Governor, I really appreciate that the concept here is purposeful investments that are clearly directed to environmental justice and opportunity. And I do think that that is the strategy forward and can be replicated in all of the countries that we're working so hard to make sure that they can engage in the climate transformation that we all are. Advisor McCarthy, you were hopeful and energetic. You always are, and each of us appreciate the recognition and shout-outs about the things in our own states that are action-oriented and really tackling these issues, frankly, head-on. But what can we do in the context of making sure that these decisions and commitments that we make today, right, have longevity? That are long-lasting, because there are political issues at play always. We don't know who might be in the White House, and as an example, in years to come, although I can tell you who I would like to have there, and whose staying power is really important to the climate decisions. This administration is critical to making sure that we exceed the goals that we set at COP today and tomorrow and in the future. And I just announced that we're going to codify into law our net zero efforts by 2050. And certainly in my first year in my administration, you know, we passed an Energy Transition Act so that it's in statute. What else can we be doing?
I think what we've been trying to reconcile is the fact that we talked a little bit, and folks have mentioned the challenges that everybody is experiencing on climate right now: the wildfires, the droughts, the heat, the hurricanes, the flooding. You know, it is just very clear to people in the United States that this is unacceptable. So I know there's a lot of drama about the Build Back Better plan and the framework that the president moved forward. But there's not a lot of drama among the American public right now about whether or not we need to invest in our infrastructure and whether or not clean energy is actually the future. You can see it. Just look at the data. That's where jobs are growing. That is how we're going to win the 21st century. So I think part of the effort that we need to take on, I think that's just me yelling, because it's just a perpetual thing I do. I'm Irish. If you're Scottish, you get this, you know, you just yell a lot. I think the challenge is to make sure that we keep using a framing of hope. That $555 billion is a good amount of money to be spending on something that we lost $100 billion on last year alone because of climate challenge. And so that it is a significant amount of resources. We have done it in a way that requires engagement of the states. that actually give money to the states in challenge grants, that requires that communities have a voice in decision making, because you're right, Governor, environmental justice has to be a fundamental consideration. And that's not just for low-income communities, it's for communities of color, and it's for tribal communities. You know, they are nations in and of themselves, and we have to respect that. But if you integrate this in as an economic strategy, you know yourself, Governor, if we move forward with these tax credits that allow the clean energy to be the winner, then the market itself, the private sector, will go and do what they do, which is make money on it, and things will change. So I think the thing we want to avoid is looking at this as if it's $550 of expenses instead of $550 billion of investment in ourselves and in our infrastructure, and most importantly, in our economy. And as soon as that's built into the system, whether it's 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 years, it is not going to be something you can turn back on. I just think we've made mistakes in talking about climate as just an expense and just a threat, instead of the biggest opportunity in the world we have to invest in the United States again.
Great. I'm not sure, but my sense is that we are a little over time, so I'm going to do a rapid, we have 1 minute. I'm going to do one, we have time for one more question. I was going to make you do the question in your closing remarks, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists, and I hope it doesn't sound like we're not hopeful anymore, but how do you deal with the folks that are difficult in this space of climate change? And frankly, just sort of overcoming resistance, which I also think a lot of our stakeholders and advocates feel like often that becomes the story, not the incredible successes or, you know, the market-driven aspects. And I'm going to go to Governor Edwards, and then we'll just sort of come through the group.
Well, this is a great question, because we are a traditional oil and gas state. That remains a very important part of our economy, and it drives an awful lot of jobs. And because we have the Mississippi River and the Gulf Coast, we have more than our fair share of chemical manufacturing and refining, all of which is important. And by the way, none of which is going to go away tomorrow. So there's a lot of concern that the life that they've known for decades will change, and that what comes next may not be as good. But the simple fact of the matter is, because we're so affected by climate change, we have an obligation to do something. But secondly, when the world market turns, it turns. And if you want to continue to be a leader in energy, you're going to have to pursue cleaner energy if that's what the world is wanting to buy and to consume. And so really, the best way that I have found in Louisiana is to go out and attract very large investments that come in, and they do things like biomass diesel refineries, which, by the way, because of a tax credit you all did in California, makes that work, along with the 45Q tax credit that the federal government has done. Gina was talking about the importance of tax credits and getting things started, because they're going to do carbon capture and sequestration on the back end of that. You do green hydrogen projects, for example, and we're doing all of this in Louisiana. And then when you show that the investment comes, the jobs get created, and so forth, it really takes all the arguments away. And look, I know that we all have different feelings about this. I'm just going to put it out there. Even the major oil and gas companies are rebranding themselves as energy companies. And an ever-increasing portion of their investment portfolio is going into cleaner and renewable energy as they commit themselves to reducing their carbon footprint. How can Louisiana afford to be more pro-oil and gas than the oil and gas companies? It doesn't make sense. And I don't want to be the governor of a state that just puts their head in the sand and refuses to acknowledge reality, and you get 20 years, 30 years down the road, whatever this transition period looks like, and you had an opportunity to diversify, you just didn't do it. And you get to the end of that road, and you've been whipping that same horse and it just goes out. You don't have another one to get on. And so that's the conversation, and we're having it over and over and over, and I think with good effect in Louisiana.
Lieutenant Governor.
So I was on a panel earlier today with a representative from Ford, and Ford has been a tremendous partner with California in moving toward a zero-emission future. And he said he drives around in his electric Mustang, and people will stop him and say, "How could you possibly call it a Mustang if it doesn't have a combustion engine?" And he said, "Well, drive it, drive one, go, get in, let me show you how great these electric cars are." And their commitment to an electric F-150 really shaking up the perceptions of what kind of performance can come from the new technology. So I think that the way that we deal with skeptics, right, is we just continue to show that that there's so much that's beneficial that comes with change, and slowly attitudes change. But another story I'll tell you is I was down in part of California in the Coachella Valley in the desert, and I was watching television. There were these ads that were running to get people to put solar panels on their houses, and it was a company selling the service of putting solar panels. And this particular part of California, you know, has quite a few Trump supporters, and so the way they were selling it wasn't put solar on your roof because you live in the desert and because this is the right thing to do for the planet, especially in part of the world that clocked the highest temperature anywhere on the planet last year in the Mojave Desert in California. Instead, they build it as this, you know, go stick it to the government because the government's giving rebates and you can get money from the government and it's cheaper energy. That gets under my skin a little bit. But the fact is we just kind of keep chipping away at the messaging, and frankly we do by providing these rebates that make it, you know, hit the pocketbook, that people will adapt when they get something better for less money. But I guess I'd just say this, though. I don't think in California the real issue is changing opinions. I think the real issue for us is a feeling that we've been so forward-leaning on this issue. We have invested so much, you know, really disproportionately with the rest of the country in clean energy. It's this feeling of, is it enough? And one of the things that just in walking the halls here at COP26 is, are all of these efforts going to add up to keeping the climate from warming less than 1.5 degrees centigrade? And so for Californians, I think the bigger question is, you know, if we do our part, will the rest of the country follow, and will the rest of the world follow? And frankly, that's why I'm in Glasgow. That's why we have one of the largest delegations we've ever had coming of officials from California coming to COP26. And frankly, Advisor McCarthy, that's why we are just so incredibly proud of the Biden administration and the incredible leadership of President Biden and you yourself in elevating the voice of the United States right now, that the U.S. is back leading on this important issue in the world.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and I can't agree more about Advisor McCarthy and the Biden-Harris administration. Given your decades-long career and your incredible work. I have a story about Advisor McCarthy. She was in the White House for about, I think it was 8 seconds in the Biden administration, and began reaching out to governors across the country, all governors, talking to you about what you needed, what your issues were, and how to bring the whole of government approach, not just and of course, what goes on in the White House important to me, but that I could rely on that effort in every single one of the federal departments and agencies, and that is incredibly meaningful. We do need to be asked, and we need to be seen as full partners, and you have demonstrated that, I know, in your entire career, but I can speak to it now personally, having the opportunity to have had that conversation very early in your appointment. So I'm going to guess that you've had many issues and many years of folks who may still even be climate deniers and don't believe that we're pushing the market in a way that is somehow unfair and unnecessary. What advice do you have for us in that space?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, but there's a good reason to reach out to states because governors matter. You test things in ways that allow us to understand what's best to do, and you have to be partners in this. And in many ways, government is always portrayed as being so partisan, but in many issues, it's just not the truth. You work together with whoever people vote for, and you do as best you can. And so, as naive as it seems, I'm incredibly hopeful right now. We are at a moment in time where I do think we have leadership, I know we have leadership at the federal level, that wants to do nothing but protect the interests of the people that they serve. And that's not just who voted for them. It's everybody in this country. And right now, I've spent decades fighting off climate deniers. Maybe they can't find me as easily as they used to when I was at EPA or something, which is not a bad thing. But I just don't think there's a lot of climate deniers anymore. I think the major question is, how do we respond to this? What actions do we take and how quickly? And what can we afford to do? Which are all very legitimate questions. And I think what the president put on the table was a plan that answered those questions. He put on a plan that's affordable, that you're not paying for, only the biggest corporations and the millionaires and billionaires are paying for. What's wrong with that? Everybody needs to pay their fair share. And he put on the table something that's going to tackle every sector of the economy in ways of reducing it in a way that makes sense and will make people's lives better. There is nothing better than to see your infrastructure being improved in your cities and getting people to move around, not just in electric vehicles, but in electric buses, in trains that actually get places and move things, in trucks that are going to have access to hydrogen that's clean and green, and also have opportunities for electric to move them around. If you haven't driven an electric vehicle, then you just don't get it. Go drive one. You'll never, ever want to drive an internal combustion engine again. They're just fabulous and they're cheap. So if we marry this with tax credits that will show where our values are, show where the country needs to go, show where the job growth is going to be and where the opportunities are, and with consumer credits so that everybody has access to those technologies of the future and those products, I think it's a winning combination. And I'm not worried about, basically shaking the bushes to see if somebody is still denying climate change, because we still have a flat Earth society. So that's been going on an awful lot longer, and I don't need to convince everybody. I just need people to understand that they have an administration that's working for them. I need them to see the benefits of that in their pocketbooks and in their communities. And I just need folks to understand that we are not planning to lose the fight against climate change because we are the United States of America. We don't lose.
This has been incredible. I'm going to ask each of you to make closing remarks. Not that we aren't completely and fully inspired, but I think it's important for the folks who are viewing to really get a sense about where we're going to keep heading. And I'm going to go in the order that we made opening remarks. So, Lieutenant Governor, we're going to start with you.
Well, I'm just going to reiterate one thing, and that is that the fight to combat a warming climate is not just the work of this generation, it is the work of the next generation and probably the one after that. And so the focus on our young people, on our schools, on our universities, on our developing workforce, on our consumers, and the next generation to see that together we do have what it takes to meet this global challenge, to me is probably the most important thing about a COP26. People hear about these conferences. Young people come to these conferences, more aspire to come to these conferences. And we really, in California, I can tell you right now, we have 3 million students enrolled in public higher education in our state. Of them, almost 40% are the first in their family to go to college. So we are bringing our values and our intention around a clean energy future to the next generation in our state. That is probably the thing that I am most hopeful and most proud of. And inspiring them, giving them the tools to be able to be the next generation of climate warriors is I guess what I'd like to just leave on people's minds as we finish this very first few days of COP26.
Thank you very much. Governor.
Well, thank you. Just a couple of concluding remarks, one of which is I agree with Gina. There are not as many deniers out there as there used to be. There are always going to be some. But rather than deny, what they're going to say is, well, we don't want to put our country at a competitive disadvantage. And what we have to do is show that if you want to be at a competitive disadvantage, do nothing. And watch what happens, because the world market is turning. And that's where we have to flip the argument. But secondly, just like we have some people in our country who continue to not want to do anything, there are some actors on the world stage that are not here, and that's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, that says U.S. Climate Action Center. Action requires leadership. And there's only two ways to lead, by example and from the front. And if the United States isn't willing to do that in something with respect to something as critically important to our future as combating climate change, then where are we going to be leaders in the world? And you can't say, well, so-and-so didn't show up, so I'm not going to show up either. That is not the United States of America that I know. That is not the United States of America that we should aspire to be. And that's why I'm very thankful that we have a president who is leading again. Thank you.
I'm passing this to you.
What did you say?
I've shot my bolt. I am passing this to you. You get the final word.
I get the final word. Well, how about this? This has been an incredible panel. There isn't, I think, a single person attending or watching that doesn't need hope for the future and doesn't need to be inspired that we can transform who we are and where we are, and that in fact a re-recognition that the United States in a multitude of ways, whether it's city by city or state by state, or in complete partnership with the federal government, we are in fact leading and making differences every day. But if we're not demonstrating that, and we are right this moment, then I think it might be a little easy for people to lose hope or lose sight of the incredible energy transformation that is occurring, including in the states that have been identified as heavy fossil fuel states, including New Mexico. that in fact you can do all of the above every single day and make a difference and continue to help you march this country forward in meaningful ways that save the planet. I want to thank everybody for participating today. I want to thank this incredible panel. I'm going to ask you to give them one more round of applause, and thank you, everyone. Good night.